All right, guys, so let's finish up with reflexes. And so we're going to start here with the reflex arc. And a reflex, just by definition, is a rapid, predictable, and involuntary response to stimuli. And so I've underlined that involuntary because it's an important portion of the reflex arc. And so it's involuntary because um, these reflex arcs have a direct route from a sensory neuron, so actually getting that sensory input, to an interneuron, right, that is kind of the middleman between sensory and motor neurons, directly to a motor neuron to an effector. So an effector being like a muscle fiber that's going to contract. And so you may have noticed that a reflex actually skips the brain. And so there's no actual thinking, with this reflex arc. It completely skips the brain. That's why it's so fast, and that's why we don't need to think about reflexes. It's something that just happens. And so, for example, you see here, say you stepped on a nail, for example, right? So this goes directly, our sensory nerves feel that pain in the skin. It moves directly to an interneuron in the spinal cord and directly to a motor neuron to basically withdraw, wherever you're getting poked with that nail. And so just a few reflex arcs that we might be familiar with. The knee-jerk reflex. So if you remember going to the doctor and they're testing your reflexes, and he takes that little hammer and he kind of gives you a little jolt on the bottom of your knee there, right? So that's something that we don't voluntarily control, right? So when he hits that portion, right, it immediately causes that knee-jerk reflex. And then similarly, with we were talking about with the nail, that withdrawal reflex, when we feel pain, very similarly, it's skipping that brain portion. So we don't need to think about it. It actually just skips the brain entirely and causes those specific reflexes. And we can learn a bit more about the difference between a reaction and a reflex. And you can watch this YouTube video and take a few minutes to learn more about those. And now I wanted to better explain the difference between somatic and autonomic, the somatic and autonomic nervous system. And so the somatic system is something where we are consciously controlling it, or it's something that we think about and we actually do. And so, for example, if I'm trying to grab a cup, right? So my brain thinks to grab the cup. It says, okay, close your fingers around that cup and then lift up. Now, the autonomic nervous system is things that we do not have to think about. So this is involuntary movement. And so autonomic system can be further broken down into two divisions: sympathetic being fight or flight, and parasympathetic. A good way to think about this is the rest and digest response. And so let's talk a little bit more about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. So the fight or flight response, the sympathetic portion of the autonomic nervous system, is where the body releases what's called adrenaline. And we release this just naturally when we're feeling nervous, afraid, or excited for any particular sensory input. And adrenaline really functions to prepare our body to respond in some sort of way. And you'll notice that all of these things we don't have control over, right? And so that's why this is the autonomic nervous system. We don't have control. So when adrenaline is released, our pupils dilate. You'll notice that your mouth often gets dry. Your heart rate increases. Your body directs greater blood flow to your arms and legs because we're getting ready to do something. We're getting ready to have a specific response. Now that's kind of the opposite of the parasympathetic response, being the rest and digest portion of our autonomic nervous system. And this is when kind of our body is relaxed. We have greater blood flow to our digestive organs, our heart rate slows. And so I like to think about this, think about just having, being done with Thanksgiving dinner, right? So you're completely relaxed after a full meal. Your blood flow gets directed to your stomach to start digesting all of that food that you've just ate, and your heart rate slows down. And so a lot of times we might take a nap or something after a huge meal, and this is why. And so here's kind of the differences between our parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. And so this is just more for information purposes. But right, you'll see, portions that we control and don't control depending on, or you'll see differences in the sympathetic, the fight or flight. And so when adrenaline is released, you see changes in all of these specific organs. And in our parasympathetic, or the rest and digest portion of our autonomic nervous system, you see different responses from our organs, but also ones that we don't control. And with that, that's kind of the end of our exploration of the nervous system. Go ahead and fill out that note sheet. This will help you out for the quiz that's coming up next Wednesday. And go ahead and finish up the activity. And so there's a link on Canvas that allows you to go to the click and learn activity, and there's a worksheet along with it that you can download from Canvas and fill out the answers and turn that in Tuesday before midnight. And of course, as is the case with all of the online learning that we've been doing, the quiz will be done Wednesday before midnight. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out via the Remind app or through email. And besides that, stay safe and stay healthy, guys. Thanks for listening.